BBOR Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia at heart and from around the globe. And hello everybody, today is Friday, another Cooper Friday here on Black Box Online Radio. On Fridays this year I've been talking to you guys all about D.B. Cooper. In 1971, on Thanksgiving Eve, D.B. Cooper committed the only unsolved skyjacking in American aviation history. He made off with $200,000 and parachuted into the night into cloud cover and was never seen or heard from again, to the satisfaction of everybody. Of course, there are going to be people out there who claim that they have obtained confessions, and some people claim that they have obtained correspondences with D.B. Cooper, but definitely not to everybody's satisfaction. In this episode, I'm going to be discussing the D.B. Cooper suspect, Milton Vordahl, and I would like to give a shout out to Stuart McAdam, who responded to a recent poll that I put out on Black Box Online Radio, where I was just simply asking you guys, which D.B. Cooper suspects would you like to hear about in an independent suspect profile video? And Stuart recommended Milton Vordahl, and there's a very specific reason why I wanted to take him up on this suggestion, and that is because I think that there is a chance that Milton Vordahl could actually be D.B. Cooper. If you go through some of these suspect profile episodes for Cooper Friday, you'll see some suspects that I've been talking about, and I'm trying to start with the ones that I think could actually have been Cooper, reasonable suspects, because there are a lot of D.B. Cooper suspects out there, and I'm going to be very honest with you. Suspects like Richard McCoy and Robert Rackstraw are at the bottom of my list, but I've been going through the suspects, and some of them that I've talked about on Cooper Friday have been William J. Smith, Joe Lackich, and one that I've talked about in the past, Ted Braden. And with Milton Vordahl, he's a suspect that I learned about last year, and I've mentioned him a lot on Black Box Online Radio. But this is the first standalone episode that I've done about Milton Vordahl as a D.B. Cooper suspect. And I would like to give a shout out to Ross Geraci of Planet X Filmworks. I was a recent guest on his program, and we were talking all about the Zodiac Killer, Jack the Ripper, and the Texarkana Phantom Killer. But Ross has done a lot about D.B. Cooper over on his channel, one more time, Planet X Filmworks, and there was an interview that he had done with Ryan Burns, talking all about Milton Vordahl as a D.B. Cooper suspect. And in the introduction to that interview, Ross openly said that Ryan was a really smart guy, that he is a really smart guy, and I could see that throughout the duration of the interview. And it's about a year old. It's been out for a while on Ross's channel, but I really wanted to wait and watch that one until I was ready to do the standalone suspect profile episode on Milton Vordahl. And when I was watching the interview and they're talking about Milton Vordahl, Ryan Burns said something that was just music to my ears when he said that the evidence can lead you to multiple suspects. And I'm just like, I am so glad that somebody said that. There's a reason why I talk about different suspects in the D.B. Cooper mystery, in the Zodiac Killer mystery, and the Jack the Ripper mystery here on Black Box Online Radio, because the evidence can point toward different suspects, and there are going to be different interpretations of the evidence. So a lot of people who are theorists, who are pushing a D.B. Cooper suspect, have just zoned in on somebody. They've locked into someone, and then they're just making these statements. Oh, my suspect is the only one who has an explanation for this. My suspect is the only one that fits the criteria for that. And as we're going to see very clearly, that isn't the case most of the time. And also, with Milton Vordahl coming on the scene, and he's a relatively newly discussed D.B. Cooper suspect compared to some people. I mean, some Cooper suspects were discussed in the 1970s. Someone who has only come on the radar in a lot of D.B. Cooper discussions until recently, to the best of my knowledge. You know, he answers a lot of the different questions, and he checks a lot of the boxes. And I would like to go through some things again. I mean, really, just giving a big shout out to Ryan Burns and everybody who's associated with NORJAC.org. NORJAC is, of course, the name that was attributed to the skyjacking. Think of it as Northwest Skyjacking, Northwest Orient's Skyjacking. NORJAC.org has a very, very detailed article about Milton Vordahl as a D.B. Cooper suspect. And also, during the interview that I was watching on Ross's channel, Ryan Burns shared some info that the most widely distributed photo of Milton Vordahl is from his passport photo in 1969, approximately 2 years before the skyjacking. So this should be relatively close to what he looked like in 1971. Now, Milton Vordahl has something going for him that I also said in the Sheridan Peterson episode when I was like, there are multiple composites of D.B. Cooper. There are multiple sketches that have been drawn of people who interacted with D.B. Cooper on the plane, and they've given their take on the subject, and there are just multiple drawings. And if you were to put all of them together, you'd have somebody that looked like Sheridan Peterson. Well, in all seriousness, you would have someone who also looked like Milton Vordahl, again, if you were to combine the composites. But you might be noticing something very different between the photos of Sheridan Peterson and Milton Vordahl, and that is that Milton Vordahl is considerably older. He was considerably older in 1971, and this is something that I will come back to later, but just to address one of the elephants in the room, Milton Vordahl would have been 58 years old at the time of the skyjacking. Is that too old to have been D.B. Cooper? Let's find out. So let's again go into this article on norjack.org. How did Milton Vordahl become a D.B. Cooper suspect? D.B. Cooper pulled off one of the most ingenious heists in history. He was the first person in history to escape a crime scene by jumping from it. Well, I mean, credit to Cooper for that. He made one mistake, though. He left behind a clip-on tie on his seat. Not too big of a deal at the time, but 50 years later, the tie may have revealed evidence of precisely who Cooper was. And yes, this is something that just has to be addressed in the D.B. Cooper case. When D.B. Cooper was on the plane, he drank bourbon and soda, he smoked 8 Raleigh cigarettes, and he left behind a clip-on tie that not only had the tie, but also the clip. Talking about the metallic clip that would have been in the center of the tie clip. So, at the time, I mean, the evidence was just so poorly handled that, of course, D.B. Cooper hasn't been identified to everybody's satisfaction, but this is a big piece of evidence. And I've said it once, and I'll say it again on Cooper Friday. I am truly shocked that this case has gone unsolved. I'm going to have to do like a CIA, FBI, conspiracy Cooper Friday episode, just talking about that possibility because, I mean, it's something that we should entertain because this case should have been solved with the amount of physical evidence that was left behind and the amount of people who witnessed this. Okay, so it wasn't too much of a big deal at the time, but several years before the FBI closed the case, they allowed a scientist named Tom Kay to take several sticky stub samples of the tie. These samples were then sent to McCrone Associates in Chicago to be scanned. And the long and short story is that there were an enormous amount of metallic particles that were found on the tie that D.B. Cooper had left behind. And there's a list right here. 39 different particles were found, 39 different metallic either elements or compounds. And for example, when I said elements or compounds, multiple ones are titanium. Then like titanium that is connected to other things, titanium with oxygen, titanium without oxygen. And as Bill Rollins likes to point out, one of them was titanium with a piece of stainless steel that was connected to it. So again, these are very, very obscure things. I mean, I'll just read some of these. Oxygen, silicon, calcium, aluminum, magnesium, nickel, sodium, potassium, iron, sulfur, chlorine, titanium, total, phosphorus, titanium with oxygen, zinc, titanium without oxygen, copper, barium, chromium, manganese, zirconium, tin, cerium, lead, gold, bismuth, lanthanum, silver, molybdenum, antimony, vanadium, fluorine, cobalt, cadmium, strontium, tungsten, bromine, mercury, and yttrium. I mean, I said I would read some of them. I ended up reading the whole list. And the reason why is because I'm just so shocked that there's just so many different types of metallic elements that are on Cooper's tie, no matter who D.B. Cooper was. But let's talk a little bit more about Milton Vordahl. He graduated from Washington State University. He got a master's degree from Lehigh University in Pennsylvania. In 1943, during World War II, he worked on the Manhattan Project. And this is one of the most fascinating things that I heard about him, and this was in the interview with Ryan Burns on Planet X Filmworks, when he said that a portion of Milton Vordahl's obituary was published in a metallurgy magazine. I mean, he got his master's degree in metallurgical engineering, so this is more or less his profession. You might even call Milton Vordahl a scientist specializing in rare metallic metals, but he's also an inventor, engineer, all of that. I would give him all of those titles. And His biggest claim to fame in the scientific world was not having 85 patents about metals, but that he worked on the Manhattan Project, and the bomb that was dropped on Nagasaki during World War II was successfully created in part due to the work of Milton Vordahl, that he was the one who came up with either the equation or solving an equation that allowed for the completion of the bomb. In other words, they would have had to scrap the project and start all over, but Milton Vordahl figured out a way to solve the problem and that the bomb was able to exist. And I mean, you can talk about the benefits of that or the harm that that did to humanity, and we can debate that issue at a different time, but that is something that Milton Vordahl worked on. So this guy is not just someone who had a degree in the sciences. He was a very accomplished scientist. He was an extremely accomplished scientist, engineer, theorist, inventor. And he also came up with different patents about ways to use titanium, different ways. He was somebody who worked with rare metals. All of these things are pointing out someone who has a very strong resemblance to D.B. Cooper, somebody who has an explanation about how these metallic elements would have been on the tie, and also someone who was approaching his later years in life and might not have been necessarily afraid if he were going to die or not. And this is something that I would like to ask you guys as a challenge question. D.B. Cooper pulled off the skyjacking because he said that he had a bomb in his attaché case. And this is well before a lot of the TSA screenings that we have now. And it's quite shocking that somebody could just walk on board with a bomb. And my challenge question for you is, do you believe that the bomb that D.B. Cooper carried was real? And I've always thought that it was fake. I always thought that it was a dud, because I was thinking that, all right, this guy probably knew that they would comply with his demands, even if it were fake. The amount of risk that you would be taking when you probably could get a similar result, as D.B. Cooper did. He got the money without detonating the bomb. People are going to go along with the demands because they don't want him to detonate the bomb and kill people. That's the way things were handled in 1971. And on Planet X Filmworks, they were pointing out how that would never happen now because of the protocols that have been put in place since 9/11. But Ryan Burns was actually in a different camp. He thought that the bomb was real. Not that Milton Vordahl would have intended to kill the passengers on the plane or the flight attendants and the crew, but rather that he wouldn't have been afraid to jump out of the plane and use it on himself, that he wouldn't have been afraid to take his own life, and that it was indeed a real bomb. All right, though, what do you think? Who do you side with, and what's your interpretation of the evidence? I mean, if I have to tell you my take on the subject, it's possible that the bomb was real, but I still have to be on the skeptical side and say that it was a dud. This person knew that he could obtain the money without actually having to carry a real bomb and take all that risk. So I would like to go back to this article here that is going to be talking all about the life and activities of Milton Vordahl, and there is a section called A Timeline of Milton B. Vordahl, and the first thing talks about his origins. I mean, you might be wondering about the origin of his name. Milton Vordahl was the son of Norwegian immigrants to America. They came to America from Norway, and he was born shortly after. In high school, he was an expert marksman, and in doing research, they learned that many of his Washington State high school records were only recently broken. Of note, he was the only kid in high school on both the rifle team and the chemistry club, and looks like he stayed with chemistry, going into the sciences for his career. He was working with DuPont Chemicals in Connecticut when World War II started. He was then first working for Remington Arms, where he had multiple patents involving explosives, and he also had a .30-06 rifle cartridge, which made it into where he could be more reliably cycled through the M1 rifle for infantry. So it sounds like he's working with metals in a lot of different things, not only with stuff like planes and not only stuff with bombs, but also rifle cartridges. In 1943, he was recruited to work on the Manhattan Project, where he would work until 1946. He worked on the Hanford site in Washington, developing the Fat Man bomb that would eventually be dropped on Nagasaki. While there, he received an official commendation for solving the fuel cell equation that threatened the entire project. That's what I was talking about before. With the Manhattan Project, he worked transforming uranium slugs into plutonium slugs. It's worth noting that uranium slugs for the Hanford site were produced by an aluminum smelter outside of Portland, Oregon, just a few miles away from on the same side of the road as the infamous Tina Bar. And here's something else that I really noted about Ryan Burns when he was on Ross's show talking about Milton Vordahl as a D.B. Cooper suspect. He also was talking about the possibility of coincidences for things. Ross, as well, is a very skeptical person. Ross Tracy, the host of Planet X Filmworks, and they're using the term vortexism. In the Zodiac Killer mystery, we call it synchronicity, about how some things just happen coincidentally. And what some people do is they attach their suspect to theories, and any time there is a coincidence, any time the similar words are used, they immediately just think that it's all planned and all calculated and all done by design, when in reality, it's a smaller world than we think, and not everything that is done is calculated. And a lot of things are going to match up in the Pacific Northwest. Over the next 20 years, Milton Vordahl's name appeared on more titanium patents than any other employee of the company Crucible Rim Crew. And also something that Ryan Burns shared when he said that if somebody has 85 patents, they're probably thinking in a different way. I mean, this guy was smart, of course, but he's also smart in an ambitious way, which I think that D.B. Cooper was. And this is just an example of one of the things that Milton Vordahl would have been doing with metallurgical patents. 93% of titanium coating the SR-71 was created with the assistance of Milton Vordahl. In fact, many of the alloys contained within the 727, C-130, and various other military aircrafts are traced to Milton Vordahl's patents. But I would like to get to one of the reasons about why they think that this guy could have been D.B. Cooper, and that is that there was a very serious financial issue involving companies related to titanium in the early 1970s, and it's possible that Milton Vordahl was able to, or he was not able to maintain all of his money, or there would have been business issues. I mean, would have been financial hardship within that particular industry. And it even states here on warjack.org, despite the success of his patents, he did not get rich from royalties because they were assigned to the company he was working for, which I'm not surprised about. I mean, if you create something while you're working for a company, it's the property of the company. I mean, depending on the way that your contract is centered and operated. And another aspect of Milton Vordahl's life is that he was very big on writing letters to the editors of newspapers. He was a very opinionated person, a very outspoken person when it came to these things. And Ryan Burns actually speculated that he was also writing letters under his wife's name about, more female-related issues. But I'll just read that segment here. He was highly opinionated about everything. His politics are hard to pin down, but he would likely have been a modern-day libertarian. We found out about 50 op-eds of Milton Vordahl so far. In these op-eds, he attacks everything from the LBJ administration to Clinton. His writing style is often very satirical and humorous, but could also be viewed as biting and vicious. Milton Vordahl was an athlete, and many of the newspaper clippings you'll find when you do deep dives on him are references to him winning amateur golf and tennis tournaments. Vordahl was such a skilled scientist that instead of purchasing contacts for his children, he made them their own contacts. Okay, now, he must have been one tough father to deal with. I mean, I could just imagine so many things about having a father who just has this super hyper analytical brain, a super hyper opinionated brain, and just this extremely smart and well-connected way of thinking. Now, let's be clear. It all depends on how people use their intelligence. There is the smart kind of mean and the smart kind of nice. Sometimes the smart, nice people are going to be the best friends that you ever have, but if the smart, mean person comes into your life, they will just make absolute hell for you. And I think absolutely everyone listening to this episode knows what I'm talking about. But Milton Vordahl also would just share a lot of ideas. He's somebody who isn't afraid to put his name out there on things. And this is something, though, this very next piece, I think is very important to the D.B. Cooper story. Among his odd specialties, he had an interest and expertise on the engineering of hydroelectrical dams. we have come across newspaper clippings where he was a guest speaker at the Grand Coulee Dam during the 1950s. This goes back to the episode that I did on Joe Lackage as a D.B. Cooper suspect, who was the suspect of Bill Rollins. And in the first video that I watched on Joe Lackage, Bill Rollins was talking about how no matter whom your D.B. Cooper suspect is, this was his take on the hijacking, that D.B. Cooper knew exactly where he was jumping from, exactly where he was parachuting from, because he more or less made an estimation. But when he jumped out of the plane and went through the cloud cover, then he would have been able to spot the area because of the hydroelectric dam that was in the vicinity. And he said more or less that would have been glowing like a Christmas light on a tree. Like if you were to imagine a tree that just had one single Christmas light, it would have been a geographical marker. So somebody like Milton Vordahl also has an explanation as to how that could work. And well, like, I don't really mean to get too sidetracked, but I think that Bill Rollins, who also has a book out about D.B. Cooper, even though he has his own suspect, I think he has made a lot of excellent observations about the Cooper case, no matter whom your suspect is, when he talks about how he thinks that D.B. Cooper jumped out of the plane, survived the jump, and that he had a boat stationed on the Lewis River. And then he took the boat to the Columbia River, and that was more or less D.B. Cooper's plan. It was all done by design, and he was able to know the location of the boat because of the hydroelectric dam that was in the area, because that stood out as a marker, a landmark. But somebody like Milton Vordahl could have dealt with all of these things. Now, here is one point that we also need to discuss, and this is getting a little bit away from Vordahl as well, but I did hear it during the episode that Ross and Ryan did together when they're asking another challenge question, and I almost never shy away from challenge questions. How on earth could D.B. Cooper have died during the jump? Because if you watch mainstream D.B. Cooper sources, almost all of them say that, well, the authorities believe that D.B. Cooper didn't survive the jump. And the question that absolutely everybody has is, well, okay, if he didn't survive the jump, then where's the body? What happened? What happened to D.B. Cooper? And they were talking about how his physical remains would have been found, with the one exception that he landed in a body of water, the Lewis River or the Columbia River. And let's just look at the theory that was put forward in the documentary The Skyjumper That Got Away, when they state very clearly that they think that D.B. Cooper landed in the river and that he was already unconscious. And there was a story that Ross was telling when he said that there was a fisherman who fell into the water and was in the water for 8 hours before he was rescued, and he didn't go into hypothermia or anything like that. They were able to save his life. Would D.B. Cooper really have lost all forms of consciousness because of landing in the river? Well, what they put forward on Nat Geo was that they believe that the biggest obstacle that D.B. Cooper would have encountered jumping out of the plane would have been the cold. And it wouldn't even have been the clouds, the precipitation, nighttime, none of that. It would have been the cold that would have been made it most difficult for him to have handled the cords for the parachute as well as landing. And by the time that he would have landed, he would have gone into shock, so to speak, or disorientation, and a combination of those factors. And then he lands on the water, and then at that point he is almost incapacitated. Then the parachute got picked up in the propeller of a boat that would have been passing by, and that dragged D.B. Cooper's body to a different location, but relatively close to a place called Tina Bar, where during this event there are 3 stacks of the bills from the $200,000 ransom that fell out, and they were more or less secured at Tina Bar some way, somehow. And all of this would have just taken place in either a span of hours or a span of several hours. And that's more or less what happened to D.B. Cooper, and that who knows how long his body was dragged in the parachute. But you would think, though, that with the amount of people who have scoured the Northwest, that somebody would have been aware that a parachute was tangled up in the propeller of their boats. We're not talking about things just like a cord or a rope. A parachute? And if that is true, and that is the case, what happened to Cooper's remains? What happened to the rest of the money? What happened to the parachute? there just really isn't a lot of physical evidence to support the theory that was put forward by Nat Geo in their documentary. But what do you think about Bill Rollins' theory that D.B. Cooper survived the jump, landed in the water, got into the boat on the Lewis River, went to the Columbia River, dropped 3 bundles of the bills, and that he more or less made an escape, that he knew exactly what he was doing? And again, I mean, you don't have to have a suspect like Joe Lackich or Milton Vordahl for that. But at this time, I would like to insert some challenges to Milton Vordahl as a D.B. Cooper suspect, and that would be that, number one, he was 58 years old at the time, much older than a lot of the estimations. I mean, the exact thing that was discussed when I did the Sheridan-Peterson episode was that they estimated that D.B. Cooper would have been 44 years old based on a combination of all the factors. And some people would say more like 40s to early 50s. Milton Vordahl was 58. Also, it does not appear that he had any real paratrooping experience, any real skydiving experience. Was he even a jumper at all? I mean, that is another point that would be against Milton Vordahl being a D.B. Cooper suspect. Do you think that he matches the psychological profile for D.B. Cooper? Or was this just something that was completely off point? I mean, I think that it could go either way. It's just that he's definitely someone of above average intelligence, somebody who perhaps understood how the system worked and knew how to get away with this. But I do want to read one final thing from norjack.org that says, what was his financial situation at the time? It is unclear. Despite the success of his metal patents, he received no royalties. Could the titanium crash of 1971 have caused unforeseen financial complications? Did he have a large sum of money invested in titanium stocks that destroyed his retirement portfolio? And all of those were asked as questions. But that's where I'm forced to admit that as a challenge, that's just guesswork. I mean, did he actually own a bunch of titanium stocks, or did he have a diversified portfolio? I mean, that is just, it's an educated guess, I'll give them that. It's a reasonable thing to ask, but that is not proof at all. So right now I'd like to turn it over to you guys. What do you think about Milton Vordahl as a D.B. Cooper suspect? And as I said, I do think that there is a very high chance that Vordahl was D.B. Cooper until I get some type of contradictory evidence or get a direct confirmation. I would say he's a very strong suspect. But what do you think? I would like to know. And if you like this episode, you can hit the like button and subscribe. It really helps out the channel. You can also go over to some of the links in the description box. One of them is for BuyMeACoffee.com, BuyMeACoffee.com/BlackBoxNet88, and that allows you to make a donation or contribution to help support the show. And anybody who makes a donation will get a shout out on Zodiac Monday. And you can also follow me on Facebook. My Facebook name is Ned DeHaan, Instagram, BlackBoxNet88, and I'm also on TikTok as well, BlackBoxOnlineRadio. I just started uploading shorts and reels over there, the same ones that come out on YouTube, just sharing them on TikTok as well. And that's all for me now. Until next time.